You are listening to Confessions of a Counselor podcast. Here we will talk all things mental health in bite-sized chunks. Hello and welcome back to Confessions of a Counselor, your mental health podcast in bite-sized chunks. I'm your host, Janice, and in today's episode, I thought we would talk about another lesson that I've learned in my 10 years of private practice. And this is a big one for me, and that is you are not broken and there's nothing that needs to be fixed. So let's jump right in. In terms of talking about this, I think a lot of people have this misconception that if there's something that they want to change, or if they're struggling with something, or if life feels really hard right now, that they're broken, that there's something wrong with them, that something needs to be fixed in their lives. And this is a concept that I will often challenge in session, that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing broken, everything that you're doing is okay. And that doesn't mean that we can't change. That doesn't mean we can't adapt or do something different than what we're currently doing. However, one of the things that I talk about in session is that there is no good or bad coping skills. It's just adaptive or maladaptive for that moment. So when we're talking about changing, or we're talking about doing something different, oftentimes the conversation that we're coming up against is this an adaptive coping skill, or is this an adaptive way for me to be living right now based on my current circumstances? Oftentimes when I'm coping with a situation, I'm coping with the skills that I've learned in previous versions of myself. Often the younger versions of us, the childlike versions of us. And though they were helpful at the time, it doesn't mean that those coping strategies are helpful in the moment. Or perhaps we were going through a really stressful time in our lives, and we have very limited resources. And so these are the coping skills that we developed with our very limited resources and our very limited ability to cope with the major life stress event that we were going through. And so if we can start to talk about that, if we can start to break down, why is it that I want to change, or why isn't something working? And we use this lens of nothing is broken. You don't need to be fixed. There's not something inherently wrong with you. It's just that the coping skills, or the way that I'm showing up, or the way that I'm being in this moment isn't working. And so what can I do differently? How can I show up differently so that it does work? So oftentimes our coping strategies were adaptive in the moment, and they're no longer adaptive now. I want to move through that and figure out what's going on. Perhaps as a child, we were told you're being too dramatic, or you're always being so loud. So we've learned to be quiet. We've learned to not speak up. We've learned to play it cool, play it tough, and make sure that we aren't being too dramatic, or we're not asking for too much, or we're not taking up too much space. And so we start to learn how to be really quiet and do it all on our own. And that keeps us safe when we're a child, when we don't have all of the resources available to us, or we're depending on the adults in our lives to help us or to manage what's going on for us. But then as we get into adulthood, as we move on, being quiet and not talking about what's going on and not standing up for ourselves can actually become really maladaptive, because we just start to do everything for everyone else. We start to do whatever it is that our friends want to do, or our partner wants to do, and we don't ask for our needs to be met. And then it's really lonely and isolating. So we have to learn to change. Not that we're broken, not that there's anything wrong with us for not standing up for ourselves, but that we learned this behavior. We learned this way of showing up. And so can I change it? So can I start to understand why I started to do that? And then can I start to unpack and understand how I can show up differently? What can I do differently in order to be adaptive in this moment? One big thing that I talk about in session, and that I think is so important, is remembering that you are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. And how can I show up and be the best version of myself? I hope that you found this helpful. Until next time, take care. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Confessions of a Counselor podcast is available anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts, on Apple and Android. New episodes are released every Friday. If you enjoyed today's episode, please join the conversation. Leave a review or subscribe to the podcast hosted on Spotify. You can find all these details on janicelyons.com. Until next time, take care.